The screams have long since faded into silence. The blood has been washed away by centuries of rain. Yet if you walk through the cobblestone streets of Europe's oldest cities on a foggy morning, you might still feel it, the weight of 1,000 years of darkness pressing down upon the stones beneath your feet. We live in an age where we pride ourselves on civilization, on progress, on the belief that humanity has evolved beyond its primitive past. But peel back the veneer of time, and you'll discover that the medieval world was a place where the line between justice and brutality didn't just blur, it disappeared entirely. Where tradition wasn't just custom, but a codified system of horrors that would make modern lawmakers recoil in terror. Tonight we descend into the shadows of the past to uncover 10 traditions so disturbing, so utterly alien to our modern sensibilities, that they would land you in prison, or worse, if practiced today. These aren't tales of war or conquest. These are the everyday rituals that ordinary people participated in, witnessed, and accepted as normal parts of life. The past isn't a foreign country. It's a nightmare we're still trying to wake up from. The trial by ordeal, when God became judge and executioner. Picture this. You're accused of theft in 12th century England. There are no forensic experts, no DNA evidence, no presumption of innocence. There is only God's will, and a cauldron of boiling water. The courtroom falls silent as the priest blesses the scalding liquid. Your hand trembles as you're forced to plunge it deep into the bubbling mass, grasping for a stone at the bottom. The agony is immediate, absolute. Your flesh sears and blisters, but you must hold firm. Remove the stone, show your mutilated hand to the crowd, and wait. 3 days. That's how long they'll wait before unwrapping the bandages. If your wounds are healing cleanly, God has declared you innocent. If infection has set in, if the flesh is rotting and putrid, then divine judgment has spoken. You are guilty, and your punishment awaits. This was trial by ordeal, a legal system that dominated European courts for over 5 centuries. The accused might be forced to walk barefoot across red-hot iron plowshares or grasp a bar of molten metal with their bare hands. The wealthy could sometimes choose trial by combat, hiring champions to fight to the death on their behalf. But for the poor, for women, for anyone without means, there was only the ordeal. The most haunting variation was reserved for suspected witches. Trial by water. Bound hand and foot, the accused would be thrown into a lake or river. If they floated, the water had rejected them, proof of their unholy nature. If they sank and drowned, they died innocent in God's eyes. It was a system where survival meant guilt and death meant vindication. The rite of first night, when power wore the mask of tradition. In the darkened chambers of medieval castles, power took its most insidious form. The lord of the manor didn't just own the land. He owned the lives, the futures, and the bodies of those who worked it. And on wedding nights throughout feudal Europe, that ownership was made horrifyingly clear. Jus primae noctis, the rite of first night. When a peasant couple married, tradition granted their lord the privilege of spending the wedding night with the bride. The new husband would stand aside, powerless, as his wife was led away to the manor house. Some lords demanded payment to waive this right, turning violation into taxation. Others saw it as their divine privilege, ordained by the very structure of society itself. Historical records are deliberately sparse. These weren't acts that nobles wanted chronicled for posterity. But the tradition persisted across centuries, woven so deeply into the fabric of feudal life that it became unremarkable. A woman's consent wasn't just irrelevant. The very concept was alien to a world where females were property, transferred from father to husband like livestock or furniture. The psychological horror ran deeper than the physical violation. These weren't random acts of violence. They were institutionalized, sanctioned by law and blessed by custom. A system so normalized that resistance was not just futile, but unthinkable. The ordeal of the red-hot iron, when justice burned flesh from bone. The cathedral bells toll as Margaret of Kent approaches the altar. She's been accused of adultery by her husband, a charge that could mean death. But the church offers her a chance at salvation through agony. Before her lies a bar of iron, glowing like a piece of the sun itself. The priest intones Latin prayers as the metal is heated in the chapel's brazier. When it reaches the perfect temperature, hot enough to sear through skin in an instant, Margaret must lift it with her bare hands and carry it 9 paces. 9 steps that will determine whether she lives or dies. The smell of burning flesh fills the sacred space. Margaret's palms fuse with the metal as she forces herself forward. 1 step. 2. The congregation watches in horrified fascination as pieces of charred skin fall to the stone floor. 3. 4. Her legs shake, but she cannot drop the iron. To do so would mean immediate condemnation. By the time she completes the 9 paces, her hands are no longer recognizable as human appendages. The priest wraps them carefully in blessed cloth, sealing them with religious wax. In 3 days, they'll examine the wounds. If they're healing miraculously well, God has vindicated her. If infection has set in, if gangrene is spreading up her arms, then she's guilty and will burn at the stake. This wasn't barbarism. This was justice. Thousands of people underwent ordeal by hot iron across medieval Europe. Their fates decided not by evidence or testimony, but by how quickly their mutilated flesh could recover from deliberate torture. The breaking wheel. When death became performance art. In the town square of Nuremberg, a crowd gathers for the evening's entertainment. Children are hoisted onto their father's shoulders for a better view. Vendors sell roasted nuts and ale. The atmosphere is festive, celebratory, like a fair or festival. The condemned man is led to the platform where the wheel waits. It's a large wooden circle, like a wagon wheel, but studded with iron spikes and fitted with cunning mechanisms. The executioner, a skilled craftsman in his trade, begins his work with methodical precision. First, the victim's limbs are threaded through the spokes. Then comes the breaking, the systematic shattering of every major bone in the body. Ankles first, then shins, working slowly upward. Each blow of the iron bar is calculated to maximize pain while preserving life. The art lies in keeping the victim conscious for as long as possible. The broken body is then woven through the wheel itself, limbs bent at impossible angles, the victim still breathing, still aware. The wheel is hoisted high above the square on a pole where the condemned will hang for days, slowly dying of exposure while ravens pick at their eyes. The crowd doesn't disperse when the spectacle ends. They linger, discussing the quality of the executioner's technique, debating whether the criminal deserved a quick death or this prolonged agony. Children chase each other through the square, playing games inspired by what they've witnessed. This was the breaking wheel, punishment for the most serious crimes across German territories. It wasn't just execution. It was a theatrical demonstration of state power, a lesson written in broken bones and screaming flesh for all to see. The cucking stool, when humiliation was the law. The village pond reflects the gray morning sky as Sarah the baker's wife is led through the muddy streets. Her crime? Speaking harshly to her husband in public, challenging his authority before witnesses. The punishment is as old as the village itself, the cucking stool. The device waiting at the water's edge looks deceptively simple, a chair attached to a long wooden beam, balanced on a fulcrum. Sarah is strapped into the seat, her ankles bound, her wrists tied to the armrests. The crowd gathers, men, women, children, all come to witness the restoration of proper order. The operator begins slowly, dipping Sarah just to her ankles. The water is shockingly cold, but this is only the beginning. With each subsequent plunge, she goes deeper. Knees, waist, chest. Each time she's hauled up gasping and shivering, the crowd calls out their approval. Teach her proper respect. Show her a woman's place. But the ducking stool serves a darker purpose than humiliation. The operator controls not just how deep she goes, but how long she stays under. A few seconds to make a point, a minute to induce real terror. Sometimes when the village has decided a woman is truly incorrigible, the chair doesn't come up at all. They call it accidental drowning. The mechanism was old, they'll say, poorly maintained. These things happen. But everyone knows the truth. Some lessons can only be taught through death. Across England and colonial America, hundreds of women met their end in the cucking stool, victims of a legal system that saw female independence as a crime worthy of execution. The pillory and stocks. When shame became spectacle. The sun beats down mercilessly on Thomas the merchant as he stands locked in the pillory, his head and hands trapped between heavy wooden boards. Around his neck hangs a placard listing his crime, selling watered-down ale. To us, this might seem like a minor offense worthy of a fine. In medieval England, it was a betrayal of community trust that demanded public retribution. The real punishment begins when the crowd arrives. They come armed with rotten vegetables, animal dung, dead fish, anything putrid enough to make their displeasure known. The first egg catches Thomas on the temple. Then comes a barrage of filth that leaves him covered in excrement and decay. But some crowds aren't satisfied with organic missiles. Stones begin to fly. A well-aimed rock splits his scalp open. Blood streams down his face, mixing with the rot and refuse. He begs for mercy, but his words only encourage more violence. Hours pass. The crowd swells and contracts like a living thing, fed by curiosity and bloodlust. Some throw with calculated cruelty, aiming for his eyes. Others prefer psychological torture, describing in graphic detail what they'll do to him when he's released. By evening, Thomas can barely stand. His vision is clouded by blood and swelling. Several ribs are cracked from well-thrown stones. His clothes hang in tatters, soaked through with every kind of filth imaginable. But this is justice as the medieval world understood it. Punishment that involved the entire community, that turned every citizen into an active participant in maintaining order. The pillory didn't just punish criminals. It transformed ordinary people into instruments of the law, blurring the line between justice and mob violence. Some never survived their time in the stocks, beaten to death by neighbors who knew them, whose children had played with theirs. The law would call it an unfortunate excess of civic duty. But the blood on the cobblestones told a different story. Trial by combat, when murder became legal. The cathedral bells of Augsburg ring out across the morning mist as two men prepare to fight to the death. This isn't warfare or feuding. This is justice. A legal proceeding as formal and binding as any modern court trial, except the verdict will be written in blood across the sandy floor of the fighting circle. Sir Wilhelm stands accused of rape by the maiden Elena. In a world without forensic evidence or reliable witnesses, there's only one way to determine the truth. God will grant victory to the righteous side. But Elena cannot fight for herself. Women are considered too weak to bear arms in service of divine justice. Instead, she has hired a champion, a scarred veteran named Klaus, who fights for coin and glory. The rules are precise, codified in law books and blessed by the church. Each combatant may carry a sword, a shield, and wear whatever armor they can afford. The fight continues until one yields, flees the circle, or dies. There is no referee, no intervention. God's will cannot be questioned or overruled. Sir Wilhelm has every advantage. Noble birth, expensive armor, years of training. But Klaus has something more valuable. Nothing to lose. When the combat begins, it's immediately clear this won't be a chivalrous duel. Klaus fights like a trapped animal, using every dirty trick learned in a lifetime of violence. The crowd watches in tense silence as the two men circle each other. Wilhelm's sword work is elegant, textbook perfect. Klaus's style is brutal, efficient. When the noble knight stumbles on the uneven ground, Klaus doesn't hesitate. His blade finds the gap between helmet and breastplate. Wilhelm falls to his knees, blood frothing from his mouth. With his last breath, he could confess to the crime and vindicate Elena. Instead, he dies protesting his innocence, leaving everyone to wonder if God's judgment was truly just, or if the better fighter simply won. But the law is clear. Klaus's victory proves Elena spoke the truth. Sir Wilhelm's family will forfeit their lands as compensation. Justice has been served, even if no one is entirely sure what justice actually looks like. The ordeal of the blessed morsel, when food became poison. Brother Francis trembles as he approaches the altar where his fate awaits. The accusations against him are serious. Theft from the monastery's treasury, a crime that could see him excommunicated and handed over to secular authorities for hanging. But the abbot offers him a chance at divine vindication through the ordeal of the blessed morsel. On the holy table sits a piece of bread, but this is no ordinary communion wafer. Mixed into the dough is a carefully measured amount of cursed ingredients. Some say ground glass, others claim it's bitter herbs that cause choking. The church's position is clear. If Brother Francis is innocent, God will allow him to swallow and digest the morsel without harm. If he's guilty, divine justice will manifest itself through his body's rejection of the sacred food. The blessing begins with solemn Latin prayers. The assembled monks watch as their brother lifts the morsel to his lips. His hand shakes, whether from guilt or terror, no one can say. He takes the bread into his mouth and begins to chew. Almost immediately, something goes wrong. His face contorts in pain, his throat begins to spasm. He tries to swallow, but his body rebels against the blessed morsel. Choking, gagging, he falls to his knees before the altar as his fellow monks watch in horrified fascination. Brother Francis dies within minutes. his throat sealed shut by divine judgment. The abbot pronounces him guilty and declares his soul forfeit. There will be no funeral rites, no consecrated burial. His body will be thrown into unconsecrated ground like a suicide or heretic. But rumors spread through the monastery. Some whisper that the bread was deliberately poisoned by those who wanted Francis silenced. Others claim he was innocent, but died because his terror made him unable to swallow. The truth dies with him, leaving only questions that no one dares ask aloud. The ordeal of the blessed morsel was used across medieval Europe to determine guilt in cases where evidence was scarce. Hundreds died in agony, their deaths attributed to divine will rather than human malice or simple physiology. Public executions, when death became entertainment. The crowd begins gathering before dawn, claiming the best spots near the scaffold. Families pack picnic lunches, mothers lift small children onto their shoulders, vendors hawk meat pies and ale. Today's execution promises to be spectacular. The condemned man is guilty of treason, which means he'll be hanged, drawn, and quartered in the traditional manner. The prisoner is dragged through the streets on a wooden hurdle, his body already broken by weeks of torture. The crowd throws refuse and curses, working themselves into a frenzy of righteous anger. Children run alongside the hurdle, trying to spit on the traitor who dared defy the king. At the scaffold, the ritual begins. First comes the hanging, but not to death. The rope is calculated to strangle slowly, to bring the victim to the edge of unconsciousness without killing him. The crowd roars its approval as his face turns purple and his legs kick frantically at empty air. Just before death claims him, the executioner cuts him down. Now comes the drawing, the disembowelment. While the condemned man is still alive, still conscious, the executioner slices open his belly and pulls out his intestines. Steam rises from the warm organs in the cool morning air. The victim's screams are barely human now, more animal than man. Finally, the quartering. 4 horses are brought forward, ropes tied to the man's limbs. At the executioner's signal, they're driven in different directions. The sound of bones separating from joints is audible even over the crowd's cheering. The dismembered pieces are displayed on spikes around the city as a warning to future traitors. The crowd disperses slowly, satisfied with the morning's entertainment. Children play games inspired by what they've witnessed. Merchants count their profits from the day's sales. Everyone agrees it was a good show, educational and morally instructive. This scene played out thousands of times across medieval Europe. Public execution wasn't just punishment, it was theater, education, and entertainment rolled into one bloody spectacle. The more horrific the death, the greater the lesson supposedly learned by witnessing it. The moment of revelation. As we stand here in the 21st century, looking back across the chasm of centuries, it's tempting to dismiss these practices as the barbarism of a primitive age, to tell ourselves that we're different, that we've evolved beyond such cruelty, but that comfort is an illusion. These weren't the actions of monsters or madmen. They were ordinary people, farmers, merchants, priests, nobles, who participated in, witnessed, and accepted these horrors as normal parts of civilized society. They loved their children, mourned their dead, and prayed to the same God we claim today. They believed themselves to be moral, just, and righteous. The medieval world didn't see these practices as cruel or unusual. They were necessary, proper, ordained by God, and sanctioned by law. The screams of the tortured were the sound of justice being served. The broken bodies left to rot in public squares were textbooks teaching civic duty. The crowds that gathered to watch executions weren't bloodthirsty savages. They were good citizens doing their moral obligation to witness the triumph of right over wrong. What terrifies us isn't just the brutality of these traditions, but their normalcy. How easily human beings can adapt to horror, can make the unthinkable routine. How quickly yesterday's abomination becomes today's accepted practice. We've outlawed these specific cruelties, yes, but have we truly evolved beyond the capacity for them? Or have we simply found more sophisticated ways to inflict suffering, more bureaucratic methods of dehumanizing those we deem unworthy? The blood on those medieval stones has long since been washed away by time and rain, but the capacity for cruelty that spilled it remains, buried not so deep beneath our civilized surface, waiting for the right moment, the right justification, the right tradition to call it forth again. In the end, we are not so different from those who gathered in town squares to watch their neighbors die. We simply tell ourselves more comforting stories about who we are and what we're capable of. The past doesn't stay buried. It lives in our bones, whispers in our dreams, and waits patiently for its turn to rise again. Controllees do chat, Sonnet 4.